Hey guys, Garvey here. Today I want to discuss how the best plots progress. How does the story propel itself from the first act, through the second act, and all the way to the third act? Having the plot progression feel natural is one of the hardest things to get right. I think it's best to start with what other writers think about the subject. Aristotle's Poetics claims that complex plots, which Aristotle thinks is the best type of plot, is propelled by nothing other than the reversals and recognitions. A reversal is when a character tries to perform a certain action and ends up with the opposite result of what was expected. A recognition is when a character learns new information which changes his perspective on what he needs to do next. This interpretation, while ancient, seems incredibly accurate because most plots are predicated on the hero wanting something. In plenty of plots, the hero could attain exactly what he wanted in just one or two scenes. These reversals and recognitions are things stopping the hero from getting what he wanted immediately. Reversals being mistakes on the hero's part, and recognitions being new information for the hero that slightly shifts his journey. In Star Wars, Luke tells Obi-Wan that he can't leave his family's farm, but after learning his aunt and uncle are dead, he decides to go. When they approach the moon to get a better look at it, they're accidentally brought to the Death Star by the tractor beam, an unintended reversal. A more modern and looser interpretation of this thinking comes from David Mamet's Masterclass. He visualizes a plot as a flight path. The inciting incident is the takeoff, and the climax is the landing. The fastest and best trip for a plane is a direct path from takeoff to landing. However, there can be slight mishaps on the way. They might have to refuel, there might be a storm they have to avoid, but no matter what, whenever they are able to avoid or correct the issue, they return back to the direct path. It's very common for stories to go off the rails and completely deviate from the original trajectory the hero sets off in at the beginning, going off on a crazy subplot or tangent. A character isn't a hero because they do heroic things. A character is a hero when they are able to walk on the heroic path. And when they're thrown off of the path, they're able to quickly get themselves back on the road and continue their journey. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. It seems like getting thrown off the path doesn't contribute to the conquering of the conflict at all. In most cases, it's a setback, putting the story on pause, if not reverse. Why not have the most economic story possible and have the hero go straight from the beginning to the end with nothing stopping them? The issue with that is the heroic path could never seem heroic unless there are things that try to throw the hero off of it. If it was that easy, everybody would be a hero. The most vague and loose concept is proposed by Robert McKee in his book, Story. He says that each scene should contain a shift of values for the characters. This doesn't mean a shift in moral acuity, rather a shift from positive to negative or negative to positive in a core, fundamental, and universal human experience. For example, a character could go from love to hate, from peace to war, from luxury to poverty, etc. If a scene does not contain this shift in values, then it's most likely a useless scene. Probably just a container for exposition which should be placed somewhere else in a more natural fashion. McKee also goes a step further by claiming that all scenes within a sequence should add up to an overarching change in values for the hero across the sequence, and that the sequences within an act should add up to a value change across the entire act. And that all the acts added up together should lead to a value change from the beginning of the story to the very end. This interpretation allows for a lot of flexibility, while also being a pretty good guideline to help aid struggling writers. The last plot progression method I want to bring up is from Sid Field's The Screenwriter's Workbook. Sid Field has created a very interesting paradigm. The simplified premise is that the inciting incident, which he calls plot point 1, should be able to lead directly to the midpoint of the story, and at the midpoint should lead directly to plot point 2, which is the moment shift from the end of Act 2 to the beginning of Act 3. Everything between the plot points and the midpoints is just how the characters get to the next point. In addition, Sid Field claims that the midpoint should lead to a very distinct change from the first half of Act 2 and the second half of Act 2, whether it's a major shift in conflict or setting or even just a thematic shift. However, stories should not abandon the core conflict. It can be shifted, but not conquered halfway through the film and replaced with something else. A good example of the midpoint shift is from Apocalypse Now. The midpoint is when they accidentally kill all the civilians on the boat because they think they have a grenade, but in reality all they had was a puppy. This marks the beginning of the crew's downfall to madness and death. Up until this point, the film wasn't too dark, at least when compared to the second half. The first half is almost satirical. No major deaths, and a good chunk of screen time was dedicated to stealing surfboards. It's only after this shift in the midpoint that we really see the horrors of war take its effect on our characters. This thinking implies that the story is really just building up to the midpoint, and that everything after that seems to happen by effect. An interesting suggestion from Dan O'Bannon's Guide to Screenplay Structure states that plot point 2 should coincide with a point of no return, meaning that up until this point, the hero has maintained the ability to give up and leave. At any moment, he could turn around and go back home. He could step away from the trail. It's only out of stubbornness and conviction that the hero stays on his path. That is, up until plot point 2 and the point of no return. The hero is locked in and has no choice but to complete the journey. It's do or die time. Every other option has been terminated. All that's left is direct confrontation. Personally, I think that all these concepts are brilliant and should be considered by all writers. Now, it should be stated that these are not bona fide rules. They're just ways to help the writer when he's lost in his own story. One big thing that all these concepts touch on but don't really dig into is how one specific scene should lead into the next. They all say it's very important to make sure that all the scenes happen because of the one prior to it and not just after it, which this is absolutely true. This is one of the biggest mistakes made by amateur writers. I know I've certainly had the issue. I'll write a terrific scene, one that's absolutely brilliant, just to realize that the scene sort of just happens out of nowhere and is more detrimental than helpful, no matter how much I like the scene on its own. The way I like to think about it is as one big equation across the story. Whatever the hero gains or loses in one scene should lead directly to the next scene. And in that scene, the hero should gain or lose something, which then connects directly to the next scene. In addition, similar to McKee's interpretation, all these gains and losses should add up to something gained and or lost across the entire expanse of the story. Most importantly, like basic arithmetic, all the scenes need to be adding up in the same units. 2 apples and 2 bananas don't make 4 apples. What I mean by that is it's very common for a writer to have a story and know that the character needs to get from one scene to the other, but the writer isn't exactly sure how to do it with the current narrative. So what typically happens is that the writer will slap on a subplot that pretty much has nothing to do with the core thrust of the conflict. Whatever is proposed at the beginning of the story should be what takes the heroes to the end. This issue plagues second acts, which is notoriously the most difficult part to write for most authors. So, if you have 2 scenes that are integral to the core plot, and then 2 scenes that aren't connected to the core plot, even though they may connect with the 2 prior scenes superficially, they don't all add up to a nice, cohesive story. In David Mamet's Masterclass, he gives a great example of a good, simple conflict that is directly tied to the core narrative. The story David proposes is a man who needs to travel from New York to California to give a speech on Martin Luther King Day. One of the conflicts is his car breaks down and he has to rent a new one, but the car rental place is closed. Now this is a lousy conflict because it seems disconnected. The audience thinks, oh, haha, I get it, the car broke down. But David goes on to make a really tiny shift in the story to have the conflict make sense. The car rental place is now closed down because it's the weekend before Martin Luther King Day. Now the audience is thinking, oh, of course, the car rental place is closed down. Now this conflict is reconnected with the core issue, even if in the subtlest way. One final issue I want to bring up that was also proposed by David Mamet is when a writer creates a killer first act, absolutely fantastic, but then the conflict that the writer has created is so difficult that they have no idea how the characters are going to solve it. Now, this is both a great and terrible place to be. It's great because you know you've created conflict that is truly difficult, so much so that the audience is going to have zero idea how the film is going to go down. Now, it's terrible because it's really difficult. You can spend weeks, if not months, trying to figure out how to solve this conflict in a meaningful way. What tends to happen, however, is that the writer gives up and the initial conflict only takes the film to about the halfway point, where it's solved in a very anticlimactic way. And then they create an easier conflict for the second half. A great recent example of this is in the film Arrival. I'm not saying that Arrival is a terrible film by any means. It did a lot of things really well, but I think it has this crucial issue. The The film begins by saying the conflict is trying to talk to these aliens. That's the setup. That's the conflict for our hero. It's a wonderful conflict. We as the audience have no idea how our hero is going to figure out how to communicate with the aliens. So what happens? She figures out how to communicate with the aliens halfway through the film, and in a very anticlimactic way. There was no, oh, aha, I get it, so that's how she figured out how to communicate with the aliens. Instead, the conflict completely shifts over to the bad Chinese not trusting the aliens. So now the core conflict is over, and it's now replaced by an easier and more stereotypical Hollywood conflict. This is obviously an infinitely deep subject, but there's only so much you can discuss in one video. I'll be leaving links to all the books I discussed down below in the description. Before I let you guys go, I just want to mention that I finally released my film, The Irish Goodbye, online. It's on my website, www.trashchat.com. I'll be playing a trailer for the film at the end of this video, so if it seems interesting to you, feel free to go to trashchat.com to watch the film. I'll be leaving a link in the description to the film. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Also, let me know what you guys think about how to progress a plot down below in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Now, on to the trailer for The Irish Goodbye.
If a person has no love for themselves, no respect for themselves, no love for their friends, family, work, something, how can they ask for love in return?
But when you look at it through the societal lens, it becomes twisted and mangled. Cold.
I know that I, like the rest, must go through it someday, for I am ordinary.